This story was sent to me by Sarah Martinez via email. I still check my locks 3 times before bed, and it's been 2 years since this happened. I was walking to my car after a late shift at the diner when I noticed the headlights behind me weren't turning. They just sat there, idling in the parking lot, watching me fumble with my keys in the dark. But let me back up and tell you how this all started. I was 23 and working nights at a small family diner in a quiet suburb outside Phoenix. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid my bills, and the late shift meant fewer customers and better tips from the regulars. Most nights, I'd close up around midnight and drive home to my studio apartment without any issues. The area felt safe enough, well-lit parking lot, residential neighborhood, nothing that ever made me worry. That Tuesday night started like any other. We'd had maybe 6 customers after 9 p.m., mostly truck drivers and insomniacs looking for coffee and pie. I was wiping down tables when this guy came in around 11:30. He was probably in his 40s, average height, wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his face. Nothing immediately threatening about him, just another late-night regular, or so I thought. He ordered black coffee and sat in the corner booth where he could see the entire restaurant. I noticed he wasn't really drinking the coffee, just holding the cup and watching me work. When I asked if he wanted anything else, he said no, but kept staring with this intensity that made my skin crawl. He had these pale blue eyes that seemed to follow my every movement. I tried to stay busy, cleaning areas of the restaurant farther from his table. Around midnight, my manager Jake left through the back door, like always, leaving me to lock up the front. The guy was still sitting there, coffee long cold, just watching. I walked over and politely told him we were closing. He nodded slowly, left exact change on the table, and walked out without saying a word. Through the window, I watched him get into a dark sedan parked at the edge of the lot. I finished my closing routine, turned off the lights, and locked the front door. That's when I noticed his car was still there, engine running, headlights pointed directly at my Honda Civic. My heart started racing as I realized he'd been sitting out there watching me clean up in the dark restaurant. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe he was making a phone call or waiting for someone. I walked quickly to my car, keys ready, but my hands were shaking so badly I dropped them. As I bent to pick them up, I heard his car door slam. I didn't look back, just grabbed my keys and got in my car as fast as possible. In my rearview mirror, I could see him standing next to his sedan, just a silhouette in the parking lights. I started my engine and pulled out onto the main road, hoping he'd stay behind. But within seconds, those same headlights appeared in my mirror, keeping perfect distance. Every turn I made, he made. Every stop sign, every traffic light, he was right there, close enough that I could see his outline through his windshield. My apartment was 15 minutes away, but I wasn't about to lead him straight to my home. I drove past my turnoff and kept going, hoping he'd get bored and leave. Instead, he followed me for another 20 minutes through residential streets I barely knew. My gas gauge was getting low, my phone was dead, and I was running out of options. That's when I remembered the 24-hour police station on Cedar Avenue. I made a sharp right turn without signaling, and sure enough, he followed. But when I pulled into the police station parking lot, his headlights disappeared. I sat there for 30 minutes, engine running, watching the empty street. The desk sergeant listened to my story and took down the license plate number I'd managed to memorize. He said they'd patrol the area around the diner and my apartment, but without a direct threat, there wasn't much they could do. I drove home a different route, checking my mirrors obsessively. The next night, I asked Jake to walk me to my car. Everything seemed normal until I was halfway home. The same dark sedan appeared in my rearview mirror, following at that same precise distance. This time, I drove straight to the police station. Again, he vanished before I could point him out to the officers. This pattern continued for weeks. He'd show up at the diner near closing time, order coffee, watch me work, then follow me home. Sometimes he'd stay outside my apartment building for hours. I could see his car from my second-floor window, just idling under the streetlight. I started staying at friends' houses, changing my routes, even considered quitting my job. The police finally caught him on a Thursday night when Officer Rodriguez decided to wait in the diner parking lot. They arrested him for stalking and harassment, and I learned he'd been doing this to other women across 3 counties. His car was full of photographs, addresses, work schedules, a detailed catalog of his obsessions. During the trial, I found out he'd been following me for almost 2 months before I noticed. He knew where I lived, where I shopped, even where my dentist was located. The prosecutor said I was lucky. His previous victims had experienced much worse than just being followed. I moved to a different city after that and found a day job. I still look over my shoulder more than I should, and I'll never work a closing shift again. Sometimes I wonder how many other women he watched from that corner booth. How many others drove home with those headlights in their mirrors, feeling that same cold fear I lived with for weeks. I found this on a Reddit thread by user MidnightRunner87. The sound of footsteps matching mine exactly on the empty sidewalk still gives me chills. I'd stop, they'd stop. I'd speed up, they'd speed up. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how my evening jog turned into the most terrifying night of my life. I'd been running the same 3-mile loop through my neighborhood for about 6 months. It was a safe, well-lit route that took me through the residential area near my house, past the community center, and around the small lake at the center of our subdivision. I usually ran around 8 p.m. when the temperature cooled down, but there was still enough daylight to see clearly. That particular evening in late September, I'd had a long day at work and didn't start my run until almost 9:30. The sun had set, but the streetlights provided plenty of visibility, and I knew the route by heart. I'd done this same loop dozens of times, even in the dark, without any problems. About half a mile into my run, I passed a man standing next to a mailbox on Elm Street. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, wearing dark clothes and a knit cap despite the warm weather. He appeared to be checking his phone, but something about his posture seemed off, too rigid, too alert. I nodded politely as I ran past, and he looked up with this strange smile that didn't reach his eyes. I continued my route, thinking nothing of it, until I reached the community center. As I rounded the corner, I glanced back and saw the same figure about a block behind me walking in my direction. It could have been coincidence. Maybe he lived nearby and was just out for an evening walk. But the way he moved, with that same measured pace, made me uncomfortable. I decided to test my suspicions. Instead of taking my usual left turn toward the lake, I went straight for 2 more blocks. then made a right. In the reflection of a store window, I could see him making the same turns, maintaining that exact distance. My casual jog became a brisk run as I realized someone was definitely following me. The lake path was usually my favorite part of the route, peaceful and quiet, with benches scattered along the water's edge. But now, with darkness settling in and my unwanted shadow still behind me, it felt isolated and dangerous. I could hear his footsteps on the asphalt path, steady and deliberate, never getting closer but never falling behind. I pulled out my phone to call someone, anyone, but realized I'd left it on silent after work. The screen showed 3 missed calls from an unknown number, all within the last hour. The most recent call had come in just 10 minutes ago, right around the time I'd first seen the man by the mailbox. That's when I noticed he wasn't just following me anymore, he was hurting me. Every time I tried to take a shortcut back toward the main road, he'd appear from a side path or emerge from behind a tree, forcing me to keep going deeper into the park area around the lake. He knew this route better than I did, knew exactly where each path led. I stopped running and turned around to face him directly. He was about 50 feet away, standing under a streetlight with that same unsettling smile. I shouted, asking what he wanted, demanding why he was following me. He didn't answer, just tilted his head slightly and raised his phone as if he was taking a picture. That's when I realized this wasn't random. This was planned, deliberate, and I was exactly where he wanted me to be, alone, in the dark, far from help. I turned and ran faster than I'd ever run in my life, abandoning my usual route and cutting straight through the woods toward the busy street I could see through the trees. Branches tore at my clothes and face as I crashed through the underbrush, but I could still hear him behind me, moving through the woods like he knew exactly where he was going. My lungs burned and my legs felt like concrete, but I pushed harder, driven by pure terror. I burst out of the tree line onto Highway 34, nearly getting hit by a pickup truck. The driver slammed on his brakes and rolled down his window asking if I was okay. I was gasping, covered in scratches, probably looking completely insane. I managed to explain that someone was chasing me, and he immediately called the police. We waited in his truck with the doors locked, watching the woods where I'd emerged. The man never appeared. When the police arrived 20 minutes later, they searched the area with flashlights but found no trace of my stalker. However, they did find something disturbing: a small digital camera hidden in the bushes near the lake path, positioned to record anyone who passed by. The detective who handled my case said that the camera had been there for months, filled with footage of women jogging alone. They found videos of me from previous runs, along with recordings of at least 12 other women who used that route regularly. Some of the videos were taken with a telephoto lens from considerable distance, showing he'd been watching and planning for a long time. They never caught him. The camera had been purchased with cash, no fingerprints, no way to trace it back to its owner. But they did increase patrols around the lake and installed additional lighting along the paths. I moved out of that neighborhood within a month and never ran alone again. The most disturbing part was learning from the detective that this type of stalking behavior often escalates. The camera was just the beginning. He was likely working up to something more direct, more dangerous. The fact that he'd herded me toward that isolated area suggested he'd done this before and had a specific plan in mind. I still run, but only on busy trails during daylight hours, and I always tell someone exactly where I'm going and when I expect to be back. I carry pepper spray and a whistle, and I never wear headphones anymore. Most importantly, I trust my instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. This was shared with me on Instagram by Jessica Chen. I found the same red Honda Civic in 3 different parking lots before I realized it wasn't a coincidence. The driver always sat in the front seat, pretending to read a newspaper, but I could see him watching me through his sunglasses. But I should start from the beginning and explain how my regular Saturday errands became a nightmare of being systematically hunted. I'm a pretty routine person, especially on weekends. Every Saturday morning, I'd follow the same pattern: grocery shopping at 9 a.m., coffee shop by 10:30, then Target for household items around noon. I liked the predictability of it, the efficiency of hitting all my errands in one trip before spending the rest of my weekend relaxing. The first time I noticed the red Civic was at the grocery store parking lot. I was loading bags into my trunk when I caught sight of a man sitting in a car 3 spaces away, newspaper held up but positioned so he could see over it. Something about the way he was sitting seemed off, too still, too focused. When I looked directly at him, he quickly raised the newspaper higher. I dismissed it as paranoia and drove to my usual coffee shop across town. After ordering my latte, I sat at my favorite window table and nearly choked on my drink. The same red Honda was parked across the street, and through the coffee shop window, I could see the same man behind the wheel, still with that newspaper, still watching me. My hands started shaking when I realized this couldn't be a coincidence. 2 different locations, 20 minutes apart, he was definitely following me. I tried to get a better look at him, but he wore a baseball cap and dark sunglasses that obscured most of his face. He appeared to be middle-aged, white, with graying hair visible under the cap. I decided to test my theory. Instead of going to Target as planned, I drove to a shopping center on the opposite side of town, somewhere I never normally went. I parked near the entrance and watched my rearview mirror. 5 minutes later, the red Civic pulled into the same parking lot and stopped 4 rows behind me. That's when the real terror set in. This wasn't some random encounter. This was deliberate, systematic stalking. Someone had been studying my routine, learning my patterns, and now they were actively following me around town. I sat in my car, engine running, trying to figure out what to do next. I called my sister and explained the situation. She told me to drive straight to the police station, but I was terrified of leading him there and having him discover where I'd go for help. Instead, I decided to drive home, hoping he'd give up once I was safely inside my house. The drive home was terrifying. He followed at a distance, always staying just far enough back to avoid being obvious to other drivers. At red lights, I could see him in my side mirror, still wearing those dark sunglasses, still holding that same newspaper like some kind of prop in a bad movie. I pulled into my driveway and ran inside, immediately locking all the doors and closing the blinds. From my living room window, I could see the red Civic parked at the end of my street. He sat there for over 2 hours before finally driving away. The next Saturday, I decided to vary my routine completely. I went to different stores, took different routes, even left the house at a different time. It didn't matter. By my second stop, the red Civic was there again, and he was watching me with that same unsettling intensity. This pattern continued for 3 weeks. No matter where I went or when I went there, he'd appear within minutes. He knew my car, my license plate, probably my home address. I started taking pictures of his car and license plate with my phone, but the photos always came out blurry or he'd drive away before I could get a clear shot. The breaking point came on the 4th Saturday.
I was at a small boutique I'd never visited before, trying on clothes, when the sales associate came to my dressing room and said there was a man outside asking about me. He'd described me perfectly, my height, hair color, even the clothes I was wearing that day. I looked out the store window and saw him standing next to his car, no longer pretending to hide. He was staring directly at the boutique, and when our eyes met through the glass, he smiled and waved like we were old friends. That casual, confident gesture was more terrifying than all the hiding and watching combined. I asked the sales associate to call the police while I stayed in the dressing room. When the officers arrived, they found him gone, but several other store employees had seen him and could provide descriptions. More importantly, the boutique security camera had captured clear footage of him and his license plate. The police ran the plates and discovered the car was registered to David Morrison, a 46-year-old man with a history of stalking and harassment charges. He'd been arrested twice in other counties for similar behavior, but had never been convicted due to lack of evidence or victims who were too frightened to testify. They arrested him that evening at his apartment, where they found detailed files on over 20 women, including me. He had photos, work schedules, home addresses, family information, everything he needed to systematically stalk multiple victims simultaneously. My file was the thickest, containing pictures of me taken from his car over several months, maps of my usual routes, and even floor plans of stores I frequented. During the investigation, police discovered he'd been following me for almost 6 months before I noticed. He knew my routine better than I did, had photographed me at work, at restaurants, even at my dentist's office. The red Honda wasn't even his primary car. He had 3 different vehicles he would rotate to avoid detection. Morrison pled guilty to stalking charges and received 3 years in prison. The prosecutor said my detailed documentation and the security camera footage were crucial to building a strong case. But the most disturbing revelation came during sentencing. He'd been escalating his behavior, and police found evidence suggesting he was planning to break into my home. I moved to a different city before he was even sentenced. I couldn't stay in a place where someone had mapped out my entire life, where every familiar location had been turned into a hunting ground. Even now, 2 years later, I never follow the same routine twice, and I always check for cars that might be following me. The experience taught me that stalkers are often much more organized and persistent than people realize. They study their victims, learn their patterns, and develop sophisticated methods of surveillance. What started as a feeling that something was wrong became a systematic campaign of harassment that could have ended much worse than it did.